The moment the man got off the plane, he started spewing saliva like crazy, almost as if he had turned into a high-pressure hose. But the plane he had been on was even more bizarre. What was supposed to be a 3-hour flight somehow ended up lasting a full 5 years in the air. What's even stranger is that none of the passengers noticed anything unusual. To them, it felt like an ordinary 3-hour flight. Meanwhile, their families on the ground believed they had been lost in some kind of tragedy. When the pilot finally contacted the control tower to request landing clearance, the ground crew froze in shock upon hearing it was Flight 828. After repeatedly confirming the flight's identity, they cautiously granted permission to land at a remote, backup airfield. Once the passengers disembarked, they were met not by their families but by a swarm of police officers and reporters. Confused and nervous, the passengers began questioning what was happening. At that moment, a bald detective stepped forward and delivered a bombshell. It was no longer the day they took off. 5 whole years had passed. His words left everyone stunned. They exchanged bewildered looks, struggling to process what they had just heard. After all, for them, only 3 hours had gone by. How could 5 years have passed during a simple flight? Determined to uncover the truth, the detective detained the plane and all its passengers for questioning. He interviewed each passenger one by one, but everyone gave the same account. Nothing out of the ordinary had happened during the flight except for a brief encounter with severe turbulence. During that moment, the cabin went completely dark, and the plane shook violently. But just as suddenly as it began, everything returned to normal. Even after thoroughly inspecting the plane and all its contents, investigators couldn't find anything unusual. Eventually, the detective released the passengers, allowing them to reunite with their families. While the people on board had experienced only 3 hours, their families had waited an agonizing 5 years. And in those 5 years, a lot had changed.